to this Maple Spirit Pulse video where we do a quick dive into hot topics on Canadian religion, spirituality, and secularity. My name is Sarah Wilkins-Laflamme. I'm the current director of the Institute for Religion, Culture, and Societal Futures, and I'm joined here today on the St. Jerome's University campus by my colleague Joel Thiessen, professor at Ambrose University and expert extraordinaire on religion in Canada, right?
Very kind.
So welcome, Joel. Thanks
you
for being here. And our hot topic for today is Flourishing Congregations. So Joel, you lead a nationwide research project on flourishing congregations as well as an institute. And so tell us, what is a flourishing congregation and what does it look like in the Canadian context?
Yeah, so when we think of flourishing congregations, it doesn't necessarily mean numbers and growth, though we often think about this as sociologists. And I always say that because you can have very large churches that are growing, but there's lots of things that would signal that maybe they're not flourishing. We talk about scandals and hypocrisy and different forms of abuse, etc. And so while numbers is part of it, it's not the total picture. And so some of the ways we talk about it is to think about three different aspects of congregational life. So we think about organizational dynamics. So within that you have, like, does a congregation have a clear self-identity? Are they innovative and adapting to changing environments around them? Are they developing leaders? Do they have a clear structure and process of how to get from here to there? So these kind of organizational things that we're interested in as sociologists. And second, we look to internal dynamics. So things like discipleship and spiritual formation, social networks, and a sense of feeling connected to others within the group, different forms of diversity within the religious community and so forth. So we look at sort of those internal aspects and even like markers of engaged laity. How involved are they in parish and congregational life? Right. And then third and finally, looking outward, so their connection to their neighborhood and their community, things like evangelism, things like partnerships with other groups. So these are the different markers or aspects of flourishing that we look at. What's distinct about Canada, or how do we think about these things in Canada? Well, I mean, we have lots of narratives and myths, as you know, in comparing ourselves to other countries. So, you know, a lot of churches will say...
Mainly one country.
Well, yes.
We typically compare ourselves to down south.
Let's name that. So churches are like, we don't want to be sort of bigger and better. Sort of this is the narrative or myth that we have. Well, it's not necessarily a myth. There's a lot of large mega churches in the US, and there's some Canadians who would say, like, that isn't our conception of flourishing. For some it is, but it's not necessarily reduced to that. Growing secularity in Canada, the growth of those who say they have no religion. So what does it mean to be a flourishing congregation in that kind of dynamic? Very different than, say, in the US, where you have these really strong pockets of evangelicalism in particular. Of course, we have larger groups of Catholics across the country here. So some of those denominational, regional variations, etc., factor differently into how we think about and study flourishing congregations here in Canada then.
Right. And so these congregations that are flourishing, and through a combination of the factors of the dynamics you were talking about, they kind of typically buck the trend of the kind of the wider, what's going on in the wider population in Canada, right? You mentioned it, there's kind of rising rates in the general population of those who say they have no religion. That's mainly come at the expense of Christianity and Christian identities. Some of the Christian denominations have had to kind of downsize in Canada, right? They've had to kind of shut or sell off some of their churches. And so what are maybe some of the key factors that you think that allow some of these congregations to go against that wider trend of decline and to actually be flourishing?
Yeah, so when sociologists look at congregations, you look at both institutional and contextual factors. So institutional, the things that we control inside of congregational life, and then you have all these contextual things that sociologists are really interested in, what's going on in the surrounding environment. And so some churches are bucking the trend just by sheer change of demographics. So immigration in Canada, we know that Catholics and evangelicals in particular benefit from that, and to no sort of work of their own, they're just kind of growing numerically, they can't keep up with it. And it's probably actually saving some of these churches or denominations in some regions because of that. Or you're in urban centers and you have a lot of intermigration between provinces, or again, immigration internationally, that again, to no fault of your own, you basically just have to open the door and people are coming who are part of a church beforehand. So that's part of it. But then you look at the things that churches actually control. And so here you see all kinds of things like dynamic preachers and engaging relevant speakers and communicators who can connect the religious beliefs and practices to everyday life. They have programming for children and youth, and they invest in that. They hire people to provide some leadership in those kinds of areas. You have a strong sense of connection, like a sense that people are loved and cared for, that sense of community, that congregations aren't the only groups providing that, but for some that's a really important and significant thing that helps to draw them and retain them in. You have congregations that are engaged in their neighborhood, so the fact that they're actually opening up the doors, so to speak, and getting to know their neighbors, different community organizations, partnering with them. For some, that actually draws new people in. And with that, for some, is like evangelism. They're actually
That's their way to engage.
way to engage in those ways. So I would say groups that are flourishing in this respect, that are bucking the trend, are doing a number of these kinds of things. It doesn't inevitably mean that they will grow numerically. It doesn't mean that's the only marker. But for some, this has actually been a quite significant part of their own kind of bucking of the trend. And I would also add that a lot of individual churches that are growing often do so at the expense of other smaller congregations.
Oh yeah, we have that concept of circulation of the saints, right? It's the people who are kind of actively involved will kind of move around, not necessarily drawing in new people. Right?
Exactly. And so this is sometimes people will conflate or mistake these kinds of things. They'll see like these individual churches growing and they say, look at this sort of massive revival that's happening, but really it's a shuffling of the chairs, so to speak. So that's where we look sociologic at the larger data as well, to say that you can have these pockets of flourishing against the backdrop of growing secularity or growth of those who say they have no religion and so forth.
The two can both be present at the same time.
Absolutely.
Cool, really interesting, Joel. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.